All right, welcome to Culture and Code. I'm Rayfield, your host for today.
And I'm Nina, your co-host. And today's episode is titled, Darling, You Have No Idea What's Possible. And that's from Thor Ragnarok. Hela said that. It's kind of appropriate because today we're going to be talking about those sneaky little assumptions.
Awesome. Thank you for that intro, co-host. Yes, we're going to be talking about assumptions and in our careers, how assumptions can derail potentially our careers. So, too many assumptions in our experience, and we'll go through that throughout the podcast. Basically, too many assumptions can cause a need for repair to any of those resulting uninformed decisions from assuming too much.
Exactly. And, our goal with this episode is to share some tips and tricks on what to look out for and the dangers of that assumptions have on your career potentially or relationships, especially as you're moving from individual contributor to leadership. And, just a reminder, all of these skills are transferable to our personal lives as well and personal relationships. They don't just end at work.
Completely agree. So I would say let's go ahead and get to it, Nina. With our first focus in today's podcast, we're going to go ahead why assumptions are risky. So we'll go through in detail why we feel assumptions can be risky in your career.
So let's start with the obvious. Why do we even make assumptions?
I feel like you're asking me that as a question, but
I am. It's just you and
uh,
I on this call.
exactly. There's no other co-host on here.
No one else.
In general, I would say it's because our brains are looking for the easiest way out, right? So we're looking for shortcuts. So if we can hold on or cling to like an assumption or some specific thought that shortcuts the actual thinking out the long term, then we jump to that. It's like a lot of times people say, don't jump to conclusions, where our brain naturally wants to jump to conclusions or to the next step to shorten the amount of time it's thinking about something, right? So we're focusing on misunderstandings. We're missing opportunities to better understand what's going on, and then we end up in awkward moments because we assumed something incorrectly.
Oh yeah, I love those awkward moments. They're so much fun. But a great example is, assuming your team knows what you mean when you say something like ASAP. Um, Spoiler alert, their definition of ASAP might not match what your definition of it is. I know when I say ASAP to my husband, I mean in the next 5 minutes, and to him, he's thinking the next 5 days. So there's a big, big difference there. It's really important to, clarify intention or meaning in an example like that. Or another one is in a globally distributed team. If we use local colloquialisms, it's probably a good likelihood that the other folks on the call who are from different parts of the world might not know what you're saying or what you mean. One example, I was in the sixth grade visiting my family in India, and I asked my cousin, who was about 18 at the time, are you mad at me? To me, I'm thinking, are you angry with me?
Mhm.
He misunderstood it to mean that I was calling him crazy and out of his mind
Mm.
because, like mad scientist, mad. And he didn't talk to me for the rest of the 2 weeks that I was in India.
Oh,
It
wow.
was terrible. It was wild. So it's really important to get those clarifications and also be sensitive and aware of the colloquialisms you're using. Don't assume everyone knows what you're talking about.
Yeah. I definitely wouldn't have put mad at me as meaning that different, hey, you're thinking he's crazy or something like that. That's pretty interesting, actually. So thank you for your example, Nina. Let's go ahead and keep going with the podcast here. I'm just thinking about like other things we can ask our listeners. Obviously, we did this on the last podcast, but as we know, you're not actively on this conversation with us. We're just prompting you with some questions, right? So, listeners, what's the funniest assumption you've made at work? We would love it if you would share it with us using the hashtag culture Code podcast. So again, it's hashtag culture and code podcast. So please feel free to share with us as you are viewing the podcast. Um, Out of this segment, let's go into the next segment where we're focusing more on our common assumptions during leadership transition. So for me, here's a big one, right? Assuming that what got you there will make you successful as a leader. So what I mean is if you've been spending a lot of your time in an individual contributor role or what we call IC roles, sometimes you may prosper in those, right? They are very easily attainable because you have another leader who's looking at a specific set of tasks for you to do. Um, but as you transition and continue in your career, those tasks continue to change depending on who are the leaders you're talking to, right? So assuming that the leader who may have been, I don't know, like a developer, a dev lead, or what they call a development leader, right? That set of tasks will be the same that the CEO wants you to do when you're a director or a senior director in an organization, right?
Mm.
That those are totally different mindsets and focuses.
Oh, absolutely. You know, as an IC, we tend to think, I'll just work harder. Nope. Leadership is all about enabling others, not being the hero. It's about bringing up the rest of your team, bringing the team together, and making sure that we're all reaching the goal, right? And moving towards the goal. It's not just about keeping our heads down and doing everything that we've done up to this point. There's definitely a mindset shift
Yeah.
that's required.
Yeah, can you give any examples of that moving from IC to where you are right now in your career, Nina?
Yeah, so I actually have to do a lot of context switching sometimes as I move from my roles within the company and my roles on a project. They're different. They're not always aligned. If I'm in a solution architect role, that's one thing, that's more leadership. But if I'm supposed to be hands-on keys, then I am expected to build some pipelines or reports and it's a context switch. So um, that's me transitioning backwards a little bit sometimes. So that's also required. But if you're used to being that hands-on keys and you're transitioning into, let's say, a project lead role or let's use the dev lead role example, right? What's the differentiator between being a developer and being a dev lead? The dev lead is responsible for assigning tasks, which means they have to be aware of what their team is working on, what the status of those items are, and what the capacity is for the team, and also upcoming PTO schedules and things like that. So it's more about the we versus the I context.
Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest things is as you're not only going from IC to leadership, but also as you're telling your story.
Mm,
A lot of times when we're earlier in our career as ICs, we do focus a lot more on I statements.
yeah,
So you bring up a good point. The we statements and how you build the overall team, if you don't switch your mindset to speak in those terms, then people will not believe you're moving to a leadership role. They think you are still in the mindset of I see. So
yeah,
I do like that you hit that one. Another classic example of maybe assuming the wrong thing is again, we're talking about not only in your career, but also in times where you're working with someone outside of your company. So maybe a client or the relationships you're building, you have a tendency to assume that silence means that they're agreeing with you.
yeah,
And that is usually not the case. I think in the last podcast, we did bring up UAT situations, right? Where you can go through all the testing internally, you can get to a point where you're showing it to the client, and the most vocal person, you'll hear from them first. But there's probably someone that's sitting in the background who's silent, but may have more influence than the most vocal person in the call. And then we naturally say, okay, we're assuming that person is in agreement with everything we've done. And then you see that there's low engagement, low adoption on the other side of things because we assumed the wrong thing. We didn't ask the right questions, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or assuming everyone communicates like you do, right? If you love Teams, but your team prefers email, you're going to be in a world of missed messages, right? And vice versa. Some people prefer Teams over email. Some people prefer no communication at all or verbal, right? I've had a few coworkers that prefer you pick up the phone and call them directly. And and that's okay too, but it's really important to understand the communication styles of your coworkers or the people you're, connecting with in your regular life or personal life. And the communications will just be so much smoother if you vet those assumptions.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The communication one is a very big one. I run into problems where I assume my kids like the way I communicate or express things, and I'm finding out that they don't always understand what daddy's talking about. And daddy in that situation is me. I'm their father, right? So I have a tendency to communicate as if I'm speaking to my wife or another adult, and they're just looking at me like, "What are you talking about?" So, in our personal lives, we also have to assume that people do not communicate the same way we do, right? And learn how they communicate. So,
Yeah, and thanks for clarifying that you're their dad, especially given that you said they were your kids. So that was really important and helpful context.
it's very funny because
Really, really
they don't
appreciate
say
it.
the word dad. They walk around the house and they always go daddy, daddy, and
Oh.
it's kind of funny. So like whenever I say Dottie, it's a Anyway, long story short, let's stay focused on this podcast, right? All right.
Yeah.
So think about your team, right? So this is my next prompt to our audience, all right? I know you're not actively listening, or hopefully you are actively listening, but you're not actively in this conversation with us. I do have a question, right? So think about your team. What assumptions might you be making about them right now that may be right or wrong? Really think through it, right? Because you're already making assumptions. You've already decided in your brain you're going to do a shortcut. What assumptions might be going on in your mind about your team, right? So think about those, you know, let us know what you're thinking about. Again, our hashtag is Culture and Code Podcast. So if you can add that when you actually tell us what you were thinking. So, all right, I'm moving to another segment, unless you have another example, Nina.
No, no, I'm good.
All right. So this, in this segment, we're going to focus on how to avoid those assumption traps. Like we already know that assumptions happen. Uh, we don't want them going into a situation where it derails our credibility, right? So how do we avoid those assumption traps?
Yeah, so let's get a little practical. Rayfield, what's the first tip you have?
All right. So, firstly, again, thank you for waiting till I was done drinking. Firstly, ask questions. I think that's the best way to get an answer. And it doesn't really put you in a situation where you're thinking too much. If you ask the immediate question, then you're giving your brain an opportunity to learn immediately, as
Mhm.
opposed to making assumptions, jumping to assumptions, or creating a scenario in your mind. The curiosity in general will become your best friend. And it also shows the people that you're talking to that you're interested in more than just what you have said. You're asking them something for feedback.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Um, I think also the next one is clarify expectations, which goes hand in hand with asking those questions, right? Don't just say soon, say be specific, be deterministic. Say by Friday at 3 p.m., for example.
Mhm.
Unless you like surprises or you like that example I gave about what ASAP means, unless you want to be beholden to that and keep wondering when this is going to happen, be deterministic and, clarify those expectations.
It kind of brings back to my mind of what you were saying about globally distributed teams and not fully understanding what people are saying. I know when you and I have been on calls with our offshore team, I hear the term do the needful. But from a clarified expectations, I never understand the time frame around that because I've heard it be used in the context of lightly do the needful. And this is usually with our ATCI or our development center in India. And then I've also heard it in a more angrily way, saying, do the needful, like do it now. So I never know, like, expectations wise, which way it is, right? Like, does it need to be done immediately that day by 5 p.m.? Or is it, okay, we're working towards a sprint goal, right?
Mhm.
And doing the needful goes into that sprint goal. So I guess that's a follow-up for me to kind of find out, like, what is the actual expectation versus the tone that's being used by people.
Yeah, it's also like an assumption, like, so would I do the unneedful? I'm
Yeah,
just kidding.
that's a good
But
point.
that, yeah, it's a good example of a colloquialism, right?
Yeah,
That, yeah,
yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to give another, example, right? So, or direction rather for avoiding those traps, right? So, I would say listening actively. So, I think we talked about this before, right? Actively listening, not just participating in conversations and not being able to kind of rephrase what was said to you, right? A good sign of someone who's actively listening is that they can tell you exactly what was said or give their own paraphrase, right? If you're not actively listening and you can't respond back to, okay, this is what I heard, then you're most likely going to run into assumptions because you weren't listening to what your team was talking about or possibly even your leader was talking about, right? And then by not actively listening, you do set a precedence for the people who are around you that your reliability to understand what is being said is probably compromised, right? So
yeah.
they can't entrust in you more complex tasks. So
Yeah, and you just made a really important connection, Ray. It ties back to our first episode where we discussed a little bit more in depth the importance of active listening. It's all coming together bit by bit. And here's a bonus tip: check your ego, right? Sometimes assumptions come from thinking we know it all. We don't. No one knows it all. We've got geniuses in the world, but even they don't know it all. And there's always something you can learn from someone else, no matter what their age, background, educational, it doesn't matter. Um, so yeah, check the ego.
yeah, no, I completely agree. All right, well, I think that's enough on avoiding those traps. I want to kind of move into assumption fails, right? So one thing about this is that from a podcast standpoint, I didn't want us to be the people that just named off things. Like, I wanted to actually be, real people, right? So talk about real things that actually happened in our career. So I'm going to ask you, Nina, and then you'll probably have to ask me as well. I have to think on the spot. Can you give me an ex example of where an assumption went awry? So like it totally was derailed, you went the wrong way, and you had to kind of recover from that. And how did you recover from that?
I have no examples like that because I'm good with vetting my assumptions. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Um, that's that ego. But gosh, oh, in my career,
In personal life, right? I mean, I think this is, we
yeah.
talk a lot about career on this podcast, but if you have something from your personal life, feel free to share it.
Well, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I think one example, it wasn't disastrous, but it did have me, le left me with feelings of resentment. Um, that did eventually get cleared up, right? But it took a while. It took like 6 months before it got cleared up. So for 6 months, I'm sitting with all this resentment. So there was a company I had joined, and I was brought in at a certain level that was not what I interviewed for, and in a different role type. And but my the verbal job description that was shared with me wasn't different from what my expectations were, right? It was just on paper, it looked different. And so I was wondering why. was this happening? Because the role type I was being mapped to didn't align with my experience.
Mhm.
And so I was wondering, was this a sexism thing? Was there an unconscious bias? Was I not clear about how I communicated what my experience was and what my background was? And it turns out it had more to do with salary levels
Okay.
and to get me where I needed to be and wanted to be, or at least closer to it, they had to do it that way. So, but it took 6 months to for me to work up the courage to just ask about it because I didn't have a personal relationship with this leader. So we were new to each other and I was just really uncomfortable and didn't have that comfort level. But once I did ask the question, I was like, oh, okay, never mind. I'm good. And then all was rosy then.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good one. It's a really good one. I have one as well. One that you'll probably laugh at because you were part of it. Um, when I was first in my previous role, the Midwest people lead, basically our town community lead, we would have our meetings in person in Chicago on the Fridays. And when we did that, I would buy lunch for everybody. And I assumed that because I did not, and this goes back to not hearing complaints, I assumed because I didn't hear complaints, people thought just like I did and wanted a very, very simple choice when it came to lunch. So
I remember that.
so my defaults were either Jimmy John's or Chipotle. And it wasn't until one of our team members pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, we would like other examples or options for lunch other than Chipotle and Jimmy John's." But it never dawned on me because at the time I'm like, it's the quickest, it's close to the office. We gotta get back to work as a team, that kind of thing. So I would just always basically have them in my queue. And then I found out that's why people were stopped coming into the office for that lunch. They were just like, it's the same thing all the time, and it was terrible. So I guess that's a tip to anybody listening to this. Do not order the same thing for your team all the time because they probably are avoiding the office because it's terrible. But after that, I started going into different restaurants. We found like a good barbecue place around the office, a few good, quick Indian restaurants that were close, right? So, things that were not the normal Jimmy John's sandwich with mayonnaise and sliced meat. That was
White chutney, you mean?
so. Um, but yeah, no, that one was one that was going to ride because realistically, our team stopped coming in. They
Yeah.
were not as participant because of the fact that I was doing the same thing over and over, and I had to learn that as a people lead.
Yeah, though that was a really great example, and I remember that, and I am so glad that you learned from the mistakes you made, those assumptions, because ooh wee, that train ride was not worth it for Jimmy John's with a
Exactly,
whole bunch of white chutney on it. No, thank you.
exactly, exactly. So
All right. So recap time. Assumptions are natural, right? Our brains are wired to try to look for shortcuts and to optimize and be efficient, but they can be dangerous. So ask, clarify, listen.
completely agree. I would also add to that you have to remember that leadership isn't about guessing, it's about connecting with people. Again, back to my example, it helped when someone actually connected with me and said, "Hey, this is a bad decision. Lunch should be fun. It should not be repetitive and terrible, right?" So it's about
Yeah.
connecting with those team members. So
Yeah. All right. Thanks, y'all, for hanging out with us. Share your assumption stories with us on socials using the hashtag Culture and Code podcast. Until next time, keep leading and keep laughing.
all right. Thank you.
Thanks, all.